Daja hao, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning. My name is John O'Loughlin. I've been privileged and honoured to be asked to talk to you today. Apologies that I cannot be there in person. Some travel requirements have me out of the country at short notice, and that's a very sincere regret that I cannot be with you today. But you'll be pleased to know we were in the Waikato a couple of weeks ago with Alibaba Group CEO Daniel Gung, visiting a farm for a day just outside of Tiamutu. We're afforded some wonderful Kiwi hospitality, had a wonderful family lunch, and a chance for Daniel to really try to understand the New Zealand dairy industry, which is such an important part of the China-New Zealand relationship in many ways, and certainly having sold thousands of pizzas in China covered in Anchor mozzarella. I've been on the coalface of that growth, and it's something that's quite amazing. But back to a more formal introduction, I would very much like to thank the organisers, Mia Fan, Patricia, Bronwyn, Annette, Genevieve, Ian, and obviously the leadership of the New Zealand-China Friendship Society. I'm intimately aware of the background and work of this group and think it's hugely important, particularly as a cultural bridge between the two countries. As a little bit of context, I am an Aucklander, so that comes with some baggage, but maybe my time in the Waikato and my time in China means that you'll afford me an audience today, and I hope as a young, very patriotic New Zealander, but also someone who's lived a lot of their life in China and first visited there in 1980 as a 7-year-old with my mother, who had a manufacturing business in South Auckland that sourced from China. I've been able to see some of the changes there and have been humbled there many times, both in a personal capacity and in business. Obviously the theme of your conference this weekend, Mahi Tahi, working together, is absolutely aligned with the Gung Ho cooperative, the Gongzuo Huzuo Shi, which Rui obviously set up many years ago. You're hearing some material from academics today who know a lot more about Rui than I do, and obviously some of the elder statesmen and women of the society who had intimate connections to Rui. So everything I say comes with a caveat that there are a lot of other people who knew him a lot closer than Jade Gray, my business partner, and Gung Ho, myself did. But we've really been honoured to try to take on the values and the ideas that Rui bestowed in our journey in China, and I'll try to highlight why I think they're important. To touch on the Gung Ho journey, Gung Ho Pizza is a gourmet pizza business set up in Beijing in 2010, opened by John Key, represents a number of New Zealand brands, including Zilong Tea, which you have a relationship with there in the Waikato and this conference, Silver Fern Farms, Moa Beer, do a lot of work with Fonterra and Anchor, Yellen's Wine, Villa Maria, and we wanted to start a gourmet business focused on the delivery space, and now it's in the restaurant space, and recently has some support from a Chinese venture capital group to really grow that into the digital era, and I think that's the bridge with Alibaba, which I'll talk about latterly. But when we started Gung Ho, we really sought counsel from, at the time, Ambassador John McKinnon and then Tony Brown, and also David Mann, who many of you know, one of the longest serving and best informed New Zealand expatriates living in China. David spent a lot of time with Rui when in Rui's latter years in Beijing, and he afforded us some kind of intimate insights into how Rui looked at China and why David thought that was so important in doing business in China. In a commercial sense, we were completely committed to bettering China while also respecting that as a foreign guest in that country, there's only so much you can do, and it's really important to allow the local teams and the people there to drive change and advance their society. And so we've always had that in the back of our minds. We don't want to be exemplars or tell or show people what to do. And in Chinese culture, there are just so many incredibly complicated layers of communication and cultural fabric to get through if you are trying to bestow messages onto people. And having a level of mutual respect is so incredibly important. We went very wide and far trying to understand the legacy of Gung Ho. Had great times with people like Lu Wanru, Isabel and Michael Crook, and so many other people related to the Beijing Baili University, etc. That we really probably stepped back first before we stepped forward. I think that's an important theme. We had to understand how does China appreciate the Gongzu Huzhou Shi before two young Gung Ho Kiwi guys from Twizel and Auckland take on a business and even so boldly brand that business Gung Ho. So that was done with a lot of respect. We wound up employing students from the Beijing Baili University Vocational School in Wudao. These are classic kind of Ba Ling Ho, Zhou Ling Ho, Ling Ling Ho Ren, 90s, 80s, 2000 kind of millennials, not necessarily with a great work ethic, classic kind of syndromes of China one child policy, etc. And so when we had conversations with the leadership at Baili University, there was a great idea to bring with us all the company values from Gung Ho and have this overlay into their school life and what they're trying to achieve at the university. We set up 7 company cultures, and I know them in Chinese backwards, but I'm going to tell them to you in English. And basically, those were about responsibility, about working together, about solving problems for yourselves, about work hard and play hard. And effectively, we brought the best practice from Western business into a Chinese context. We also found it very valuable to enmesh ourselves in a lot of non-commercial entities, including local charities. We did work with Beijing Zoo, a number of animal pet rescue centers, Greenpeace in China, the World Wildlife Foundation, Jane Goodall Institute, and we hosted students and interns from New Zealand on the New Zealand-China Prime Minister's Scholarship. And all of these things are really about having something for our team to make a contribution to China. On the flip side, we also sent chefs to New Zealand. They actually visited the Zilong estate last year, had trainings in restaurants and visited Fonterra cheese factories. And so it's all about empowering the Chinese there. And I think the pinnacle of it came with Jade Gray's work, and Jade is my business partner who's still in China with Gung Ho, around B Corporation. This is really about corporate and social responsibility, having a triple bottom line to measure business along the lines of profit, planet, and people. And so now we're a fully incorporated B Corporation, which is originally a US measurement for corporate and social responsibility. And we're at the vanguard of showing other Chinese organizations how to be a B Corp. And this is really taking off with a lot of steam. And companies like Patagonia and Ben & Jerry's, they have this certification. And so that's something being very, very central to our business. And also customers, Chinese appreciate that in 2017 and 18 and 19. I think going forward, having that those types of hallmarks to your business is going to be very, very important, the same way that it is for businesses in New Zealand. Taking a step further into Alibaba in the world of Jack Ma, that has been, again, after my Gung Ho experience coming from the corporate world of big corporate businesses before that, even more humbling. The business is headquartered in Hangzhou, set up 19 years ago, is now a top 10 business in terms of market capitalization globally, 65,000 employees. We have about 40 people in Australia and New Zealand, offices in Sydney and Melbourne, and soon one in New Zealand. Pierre Schmolders is a country manager of New Zealand. We have another Aucklander who went to grammar with me, David Green, running our cloud business. And some of you may even know David Oliver from South Canterbury, who was employee number 42 at Alibaba. And so in addition to the most senior leadership, were very, very overweight Australia and New Zealand. So I came into a business that was just becoming to go international with this very big focus on Australia and New Zealand. And it's really about making it easier to do business. That's the mantra of Alibaba. And so we're all about getting SMEs and brands from Australia and New Zealand up onto the big platforms in China. Now, less so about what the business does, but rather how does it operate from a company culture standpoint. Joining Alibaba was like joining a startup, equivalent to joining a Google or a Facebook perhaps 15 years ago, or Amazon at that similar time. The business is effectively evolving every week. There are new business units being built. They are active in cloud computing. They're active in payments with Jiffubao, Alipay. They've effectively been the biggest disruptor in the banking sector. They're an enormous logistics business. And then through all the wealth creation and the success of the business, Jack Ma and Joe Tsai and the founders have multiple other personal ventures and charities, and huge interests on the mainland around water conservation, education in rural China, improving food safety, etc., etc. And so I came into this very, very, very large world, but the thing that struck me about it the most was that it's just moving so fast and continues to evolve incredibly quickly. And so you have two speeds: the New Zealand speed, which is a little bit about the batch, the boat, and the beamer, and going to see the chiefs at the weekend and enjoying nature and all those wonderful things, and things that I'm very fond of. And having just spent Chinese New Year up at Kowlow with my family, it's something I hold very dear to my heart. We're just so fortunate in New Zealand, and many Chinese New Zealanders now live that dream and that story as well, as did my mother, who was a refugee to New Zealand in the late 60s from Hungary. So we have that wonderful wealth and prosperity and experience in New Zealand, as well as some less prosperous things that we can talk about separately. But in China, everyone's kind of head down, working, trying to make their life better, and have some betterment for the next generation. And so you have these two speeds, which are very, very different. So a lot of our job as the international ambassadors for the business is about managing cultural difference. And so Jack's very aware of this, because the business had a first initial foray into North America in the late 90s. And that wasn't entirely successful. There was a lot of separation between Hangzhou head office and the offices in Silicon Valley. And so since that time, they've really worked out how to work internationally and make sure they've got the right people on the right seats in these different markets. And that's where I work with a lot of our teams from Taiwan and Hong Kong and Hangzhou and Australia and New Zealand, and really try to bridge the two cultures. And so a lot of the times it's really about understanding our clients and the companies we work with, spending a lot of time getting out into rural Australia and New Zealand. And in the same way that Rui tried to understand China, and Jade and myself tried to sincerely and deeply understand Chinese culture, now it's about Alibaba trying to understand non-Chinese culture outside of China. And so that's why they've hired a number of non-Chinese people, but people with experience in the Chinese market. I think that's the most important thing. I'm blessed to work with a woman, Maggie Zhou, who was Jack's assistant for a long time. She was actually his first client before Alibaba, with the Yellow Pages business that he started in Hangzhou. And we also have Scott Nee, who's a early employee as well. And my BD team, a lot of them are these wonderful young Australian, Chinese people of Taiwanese background, etc., who might have actually hit a bamboo ceiling in the corporate world in Australia and New Zealand, and are now working in the e-commerce world. And so when we go and meet companies and businesses and small businesses, they may be multi-generational, hundreds of years old, and the thought of going to China can be quite daunting. So we have to make them comfortable with that journey, give them advice on whether or not they should be going to China. And a lot of the time, that's really cultural. Do the stakeholders in that business, the people in that business, believe in China? Are they going to be willing to step into that market and the competitive dynamics up there, which are quite intense? But more importantly, are they going to listen? Are they going to listen to advice from category managers in China and people in Hangzhou about the journey their business should take? And that's something that I learned in my earliest times with David Mann, is that if clients aren't willing to listen to advice about the market, then it's very difficult to expect they're going to have a successful journey in China. So those are some vignettes and some context and some analogies and metaphors for doing business in China. But when I look at doing business in China, it really is about working together. It's 90% cultural. There's always a demand for your product there. And so if you don't get the cultural things right, then you're not going to have a great journey up there. But it's been hugely enriching for me. I really hope that a new generation of New Zealanders spend less time on their OE in Europe, which is an important part of our historical journey as a country, and really spend more time in Asia. I think that's hugely important. More Mandarin in our schools at the primary school level is something I'm very passionate about, and really look forward to connecting with the society again. And to maybe sum up, I think there was a debate or a moot later in the day about, will the society be needed in the future if everything goes to plan? I think it will be needed. I think we're not quite there yet, and the work that the society does is too important. So thank you, and 再见.